The heavy oak doors of the library were bolted from the inside. Alara Vance stood beneath a pillar in the adjoining gallery, holding her 1-month-old daughter. In her arms, Wren was asleep. Her mouth latched onto the collar of Alara's blouse, her small lips pulsing softly. She was oblivious to the world that was collapsing around them. Julian Hawthorne was on his knees on the cold flagstone floor in the center of the room. The sharp crack of his knees hitting the stone silenced the entire assembly. "I ask the family's permission," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried with perfect clarity to every person in the library. Old Mr. Hawthorne set his teacup down on the mahogany table with a heavy thud. The porcelain clattered, a shrill, piercing sound. "What did you say?" Julian lifted his head. His face was pale, but his gaze was resolute. "I am requesting permission to dissolve my marriage to Alara Vance." The room fell into a profound silence. Mrs. Hawthorne was the first to react. She shot to her feet, her finger trembling as she pointed at Julian. "Are you insane? Alara has managed this household for 3 years and bore you a child. You want to divorce her?" "Not a contested divorce," Julian said, lowering his eyes. "A dissolution of the marriage, an amicable separation." "What's the difference?" Mr. Hawthorne's voice was a low growl as he slammed his hand on the table. "In the 100-year history of the Hawthorne family, there has never been such a preposterous affair. You will explain yourself. Why?" Julian remained kneeling, his posture rigid. His throat worked before he spoke, his voice hoarse. "Cassie is back." 3 words. The air seemed to be sucked out of the room. Alara felt her blood turn to ice. In her arms, Wren stirred, letting out a faint, whimpering sound. Alara instinctively tightened her hold, but her fingertips were already numb. Cassie. Cassandra Lowe. The woman who had been kidnapped and gone missing during a project trip in South America 3 years ago. Julian's childhood sweetheart. The person for whom he whispered "I'm sorry" over and over in his sleep. She was held for 3 years. She was tortured. Julian's voice trembled, his eyes turning red. Now she's back, but her body is ruined. She can never have children. And it's all my fault. If I hadn't taken her to that project site, she wouldn't have. "Enough," Mr. Hawthorne cut him off, his chest heaving. "And for this, you would cast aside your wife and child?" Julian closed his eyes. When he opened them, his gaze swept over Wren, nestled in Alara's arms. It lingered for a breath, then quickly moved away. "Wren will be removed from the family trust. I will make other arrangements for her." Alara heard a roaring in her ears. She watched the back of the man kneeling on the floor, the straight spine, the faintly trembling shoulders, the face etched with anguish as he forced out those words. He was suffering. He was suffering for his own decision. But what he was saying was that he would kick their 1-month-old daughter out of a multi-billion-dollar family trust fund. Mrs. Hawthorne rushed forward. "Julian, look closely. That is your own flesh and blood. She's only a month old, and you want to disinherit her? Have you lost your mind?" Julian bowed his head until it touched the stone floor, the impact making a dull thud. "Cassie can't bear the thought of me having a child, the suffering she endured. Absurd?" Mr. Hawthorne slammed his hand on the table, then fell unnervingly silent. His silence was more terrifying than his rage. He looked at Julian coldly. "Do you think physical pain can buy you forgiveness? Do you think this is some medieval play?" Julian lifted his head, his gaze desperately resolute. "This isn't a play. This is the price I have to pay. For Cassie and for Alara. I will not leave this room until you allow me to do this." Mr. Hawthorne stared at his son for a long moment. Then he turned to the stunned household staff. "All of you, out," he commanded, his voice like ice. "Peterson, stay. Lock the library doors. No one enters until I say so." The large room quickly emptied, leaving only Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne, Alara, the kneeling Julian, and the butler, Peterson, standing grimly by the door. "Fine," Mr. Hawthorne said, his voice low. "You want to prove your sincerity through pain. Then prove it. But this family will not stoop to some archaic form of discipline. You wanted this. So you do it yourself." Julian seemed to have been waiting for those words. He slowly stood up, shrugging off his suit jacket with deliberate movements. He didn't look at anyone. He walked toward the fireplace, but didn't choose a whip or cane. He undid his own leather belt. A designer belt with a heavy sterling silver buckle. He turned his back to them, facing the empty wall. 50 times, he said, his voice hoarse. After 50 times, I beg you to grant my request. Then, to Alara's horror, he raised his arm. The hiss of the air and the sickening crack of the metal buckle against his own back echoed in the dead silence of the library. Julian flinched but made no sound. By the 5th blow, streaks of blood were seeping through the shirt. By the 10th, the white fabric was stained a dark crimson. Standing by the pillar, Alara felt Ren jolt awake at the sound, letting out a wail. Alara mechanically patted her daughter's back, her eyes fixed on the man lashing himself, silently taking the punishment. He clenched his jaw, sweat tracing a path from his temples down his neck. 20 blows. 30. Mrs. Hawthorne was sobbing, unable to stand, supported by her husband. Mr. Hawthorne's face was a mask of fury, his eyes locked on his son. At 40 blows, Julian's own hand was shaking. "Stop," Mr. Hawthorne commanded in a thick voice. Julian paused, his back a bloody ruin. He braced himself against the wall, struggling to lift his head. "Father, there are still 10 to go. After they are done, I beg you to grant my request." Mr. Hawthorne's hand was shaking. He raised a finger to point at Julian, his lips moving, but no words came out. "Continue," Julian said himself. When the final 10 blows were done, he could no longer stand on his own. He slid down the wall, his ruined back leaving a smear of blood. He pushed himself up, swayed, then straightened his body and turned his head to look at Alara. His eyes were filled with a pain so real it seemed to overflow. "Alara," he rasped, his voice almost unrecognizable. "I'm sorry." Alara looked down at Ren in her arms. Her daughter's cries had softened to whimpers, her small face streaked with tears. Her eyes were half closed, one tiny hand clutching the fabric of Alara's blouse. Alara suddenly remembered, just a month ago, this same man holding their newborn daughter, talking on the phone in the hospital corridor. "I have a daughter," he had said. "Her name is Ren. May she live a life of peace and joy." Just 1 month ago. "Alara," Julian called again. He seemed to want to walk toward her but staggered as the pain from his wounds tore through him. Alara lifted her head. She realized her own hand was trembling, a tremor that ran from her fingertips all the way to her shoulder. A tremor she couldn't stop. Her lips were shaking too. She pressed them together firmly, tasting blood. She had bitten her tongue without realizing it. But she did not cry. "The trust document," she heard her own voice, as flat as a still lake. "I want to see you sign it yourself." Julian's body went rigid. "Alara, what are you saying?" "You want Ren removed," Alara said, looking at him. "Then do it in front of me. Strike her name from the list of beneficiaries. I want to watch you sign." The library fell silent once more. Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne both turned to look at her, their eyes filled with shock and a hint of pity. Julian stood frozen, blood dripping from the hem of his ruined shirt onto the flagstone floor. He opened his mouth, his throat working, but no words came out. "The words you just spoke," Alara's voice remained calm. "I heard every single one. You've already endured 50 lashes. Surely a signature isn't too much to ask." Julian closed his eyes. A moment later, supported by the staff, he walked to the large desk. The butler, with trembling hands, opened the safe and took out the family trust documents. Ren's name was on the last line, Ren Hawthorne. Date of birth, 1 month ago. The ink was still fresh. He picked up the pen. His hand shook, the nib hovering over the line for a long time. Alara stood 10 feet away, holding their daughter, watching him without moving. In her arms, Ren gave a tiny yawn, utterly unaware. Julian brought the pen down. A heavy signature slashed across the authorization column, the stroke dragging out too long a mark left by his trembling hand. After signing, he did not turn around. Alara lowered her head, pressing her lips to her daughter's warm forehead. She held the pose for 2 breaths. Then she looked up, her voice clear. "Good, I saw it." She turned to Mr. Hawthorne and inclined her head slightly. "Dad, I'll sign the divorce papers." Mrs. Hawthorne shot up from her seat. "Alara!" "I have conditions," Alara said, straightening her back. Her gaze swept calmly over Julian's bloody back, finally landing on Mr. Hawthorne's face. Julian said he would make other arrangements for Ren. "That won't be necessary. Ren leaves with me. Since she has been removed from the Hawthorne name and trust, from this day forward, her last name is Vance. She has no further connection to this family." She paused. "As for compensation?" Julian finally turned around, covered in blood, his face ashen. He looked at her with a gaze full of pain, guilt, and even a flicker of relief. Alara saw it, that flicker of relief. It was the same look he had given her on their wedding day 3 years ago. At the reception, with candlelight glowing on his face, he had said, "Alara, I will be good to you." Now, he stood in the library, covered in his own blood, having just signed away their daughter's birthright. The pain in his eyes was as genuine as the tenderness had been back then. He had been sincere when he promised to be good to her, and he was just as sincere now as he prepared to abandon them. It was just that she and Ren, together, were not worth as much as his "I'm sorry" to another woman. The compensation. Alara's voice finally betrayed a hint of dryness, almost imperceptible. She took a breath before continuing. "We'll discuss it tomorrow. Tonight, I'm taking Ren back to our rooms." She turned, holding her daughter, and walked out of the library, step by step. Behind her were Mrs. Hawthorne's suppressed sobs, Mr. Hawthorne's furious, defeated curse of "goddamn fool," and Julian's hoarse, repeated apologies. She didn't look back. The moment she stepped out of the library, the cold December wind cut through her, chilling her to the bone. Her steps were much slower than when she had arrived, her knees shaking uncontrollably. The nanny, Maria, hurried over. Seeing Alara's face, she gasped. "Ma'am, take Ren." Alara handed her daughter over. The instant Maria took the baby, Alara's fingers finally uncurled. She had been clutching the baby's blanket so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She leaned against a gallery pillar for a moment. The night was cold. The sounds from the library faded. Her arms were empty, and she felt as if something had been hollowed out from inside her. But she knew she couldn't collapse here. There was another battle to fight tomorrow. Not for Julian, not for this dead marriage. For Ren. For their future. Julian wanted to pay for his clear conscience with 50 lashes and an apology. If he wanted to feel absolved, then his absolution would have to be worth a fortune. Alara pushed herself off the pillar. She raised a hand to smooth the hair the wind had messed up and walked slowly toward her own wing of the house. Her legs were still shaking, but her stride was steady now. The next day, Alara opened her eyes to find she had fallen asleep sitting on the floor, leaning against the nightstand. Ren was sleeping soundly in her crib, a tiny fist clutching a muslin cloth. Alara looked at her own hands. There were dark red crescent marks in her palms from where she had dug her nails in the night before. Her hand was still trembling, a fine, unstoppable tremor. She clenched and unclenched her fist 3 times before the shaking subsided. "Ma'am," Maria said softly from the outer room, "it's time to feed Ren." Alara answered, mechanically unbuttoning her blouse. As Ren latched on, she looked down at her daughter's face and suddenly felt a sting in her eyes. She bit her tongue, hard. This was not the time to cry. The divorce papers were signed last night. He had agreed to let her take Ren, agreed to let Ren take her name. But the compensation, she had only said, "We'll discuss it tomorrow." Tomorrow was today. She had to get what she was owed while Julian was still drowning in his mix of guilt and relief. Once that window closed, once Cassandra Lowe was installed in this house and had found her footing, it would be too late to ask for anything. Ren finished eating, gave a tiny burp, and fell back asleep. Alara handed her to Maria and sat down at her vanity. The woman in the mirror was ashen, with dark circles under her eyes and chapped lips. She hadn't had water all night. She didn't put on makeup. She just splashed her face with cold water, changed into a clean, simple sweater, and walked out. In the main sitting room, the head butler, Mr. Peterson, was waiting. "Ma'am." He bowed slightly, his expression clearly troubled. "Mr. Hawthorne has instructed that his lawyer will be handling the details today. His injuries are severe, and the doctor said he shouldn't leave his bed." "No need to see him," Alara cut him off. "Bring me the master ledger of the Hawthorne family's private assets." Peterson froze. "I have been a part of this family for 3 years. I have the list of assets I brought into this marriage." Alara's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "But for the part of the settlement that is fair compensation, I need to see the master ledger to determine a number." Peterson's expression shifted, and he finally spoke in a dry tone. "Ma'am, the ledger has always been under the personal care of Mr. Hawthorne Sr. Then go ask Mr. Hawthorne Sr. Peterson stood his ground, his lips moving, but ultimately said nothing more. He turned and walked quickly toward the main wing. Alara sat down to wait. The morning breeze slipped through her sleeves, and only then did she realize she was covered in a cold sweat. Her sweater was damp and cold against her skin. She clenched her fists inside her sleeves, then forced herself to relax. A few minutes later, it wasn't Mr. Hawthorne Sr. who arrived. It was Julian. He was supported by 2 men walking slowly. The 50 lashes from the night before were still fresh. His back was rigid, and with every step his face grew a shade paler. A suit jacket was draped over his shoulders. Beneath it, she could see the layers of bandages, some already stained with faint red. Alara. He stopped 10 feet away. The men let go and stepped back. He braced himself against a pillar, his breathing uneven, but his eyes were fixed on her face, holding a complex, probing tenderness. I'll be the one to discuss the compensation with you. He paused, his voice still hoarse. You don't have to trouble my father. Alara looked at him. The morning light cast his profile in sharp relief. His features were still handsome, the same face that had captivated so many 3 years ago. Now, pale from his injuries and etched with a repressed pain, it held a certain vulnerability. She suddenly remembered his expression in the library last night, kneeling as he apologized. It was just as sincere as this. But what did sincerity matter? A sincere apology, a sincere striking of his daughter's name, a sincere request for her to give up her place. Let's talk, she said. Julian seemed to let out a breath of relief. Let's go inside, he said, gesturing. It's windy out here. You should. Right here is fine. Julian's hand froze in midair. He slowly drew it back, placing it on the pillar for support. He nodded. All right. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. Alara, I know I owe you more than I can ever repay. For these 3 years, you've managed everything for the family. You've cared for everyone's health. I remember all of it. He paused, his voice dropping lower. I've thought about it. The 800-acre industrial park west of the city, I'll have it transferred to your name. Also, 2 commercial properties in the city, one on the Upper East Side, and one on that a storefront in the village. You know herbal medicine. The village spot would be perfect. Not enough. Julian's words were cut short. He looked up at her. Alara's expression was calm. She wasn't even looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on a magnolia tree in the courtyard. 2 properties, she said, her voice low, enunciating each word clearly. But not the 800-acre industrial park. I want the 1,000-acre tech campus west of the city. And the vineyard estate upstate. Julian's throat worked. Those were 2 of the best assets in his personal portfolio. The tech campus was a legacy asset from a government defense contract, generating $30 million a year in lease income alone. The vineyard estate was the only inheritance left to him by his late mother. Alara, the tech campus, fine, but the vineyard. She ignored him and continued, the Upper East Side property, the village apothecary, and the clinic on Carmine Street. 3 properties? Julian's lips tightened. The Carmine Street clinic was an old Hawthorne family business, passed down for 3 generations, and $50 million in cash. 50 million? Julian repeated, stunned. Alara finally turned to look at him. Her eyes were dry. There were no tears, no redness, just an indescribable emptiness. Julian Hawthorne, she said, using his full name. Her voice was so calm it didn't sound like a negotiation, more like a statement of fact. You took 50 lashes last night. He didn't speak. You knelt in that library, in front of me, and you struck Ren's name from the trust. His fingers tightened on the pillar, his knuckles turning white. While you were doing all that, she paused. What were you thinking? Julian looked away. You were thinking. Her voice finally held a trace of grit, like sandpaper on her throat, that after all that suffering, you could have your peace of mind. You could tell yourself you weren't a heartless man, but a good man torn by love. You were punished for Cassie, you compensated Alara, you had done everything you could. Julian's body went rigid. Those 50 lashes were for your own peace of mind. Alara's voice returned to its calm state, now tinged with a faint, almost non-existent smile. But I'm not playing a part in your drama. She pulled a piece of paper from her pocket. She had written it late last night, each stroke neat and precise. 2,000-acre properties, 3 prime Manhattan storefronts, 50 million in cash. She held the paper out to him. $1 less, and I will tear up this divorce agreement. Julian stared at the paper. His hand was shaking, not from his injuries, but because the assets on that list amounted to nearly a third of his personal liquid holdings. He looked up, his lips moving as if to speak. Alara waited. A long time passed before he exhaled a ragged breath. His voice was raw, the vineyard estate. It was my mother's. Your mother's legacy, Alara finished for him, her tone unwavering. I know. The winter she passed away, you had a fever that wouldn't break. I was the one who brewed your medicine by hand for 7 straight days. On the 4th day, the hospital's prescription wasn't working, I adjusted the formula myself and broke your fever. Julian's pupils contracted slightly. That year, you knelt before your mother's portrait and swore that for the rest of your life, you would be good to me. She stopped abruptly. There's no point in saying these things. She repeated, the vineyard estate. I want it. Julian closed his eyes. He leaned against the pillar and stood there for a long time. The morning light moved across his face, revealing the slight tremor of his eyelashes. Finally, he nodded once. Fine. The single word seemed to take all the strength he had left. Alara put the paper back in her pocket. Within 3 days, all property deeds and the cash transfer must be completed. She turned to leave. 3 days from now, I will take Ren and go. Alara. She stopped but didn't turn back. Where will you go? She didn't answer. From behind her, Julian spoke again, his voice so soft it was nearly lost to the wind. If you need anything, you can still come to me. If you ever have any trouble, I won't. With those 2 words, she walked out of the gallery. The moment she returned to her rooms and closed the door, Alara's knees gave out. She slid down the doorframe to the floor, her back against the cold wood, her breath coming in ragged gasps. It felt as if a hand were squeezing her chest, and she couldn't get a full breath. Her hands were shaking again, her entire right arm trembling uncontrollably. The calmer her voice had been in front of him, the more violent the backlash was now. She bowed her head, pressing the heel of her hand hard against her chest. Don't cry. Ren is sleeping. Maria is in the next room. And in the wing across the courtyard is Cassandra Lowe. That woman is surely listening for any news. She couldn't let anyone see her like this. Alara sat with her eyes closed for a long time, until her breathing evened out and the shaking subsided. Only then did she use the doorframe to pull herself up. She poured a glass of cold water and drank it in one gulp. Then she opened a drawer and took out the list of assets she had brought to the marriage, checking it one more time. Jewelry, antiques, rare medicinal herbs, those were minor. The real value was in the deeds to 3 ancestral properties her father had given her in Oregon, and the $5 million fund her colleagues in the naturopathic community had gifted her at her wedding. Adding what she had just secured from Julian, 2,000-acre properties, 3 prime Manhattan storefronts, $50 million in cash, it was enough. It was enough for her and Ren to live out the rest of their lives comfortably. She folded the list and tucked it into an inner pocket. Then she sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and began to write an email to her grandmother in Oregon. Grandma, she wrote, I'm coming home. Ren and I need a place to stay. As she typed the word child, her fingers paused. The cursor blinked on the screen. She took a deep breath and continued typing. The next morning at 9 a.m., Alara sat in the east drawing room of the Hawthorne estate. A blank property settlement agreement lay on the long table before her. The lawyer she had hired, Catherine Zane, had arrived. Zane was the most ruthless divorce attorney in New York City, a woman in her early 40s with gold-rimmed glasses. The first thing she did upon entering was to place a digital voice recorder in the center of the table. The small red light was on. Mr. Peterson stood at the door, his face a portrait of unease. Ma'am, Mr. Hawthorne said he would come himself. Let him come, Alara said. She was wearing a black turtleneck sweater, her hair pulled back simply. She wore no makeup, the dark circles under her eyes stark against her pale skin. A small scabbed cut was visible on her lip from where she'd bitten it, but she sat perfectly straight, her right hand resting on her knee. Her fingertips occasionally tightened and relaxed, the only part of her that was still trembling, hidden beneath the table where no one could see. 10 minutes later, Julian came in. He walked slowly, the injuries from 2 nights ago making every step a stiff, painful movement. A suit jacket was draped over his shoulders. He wasn't wearing a dress shirt, and the contours of bandages were visible underneath. He stopped short when he saw Catherine Zane. Alara. He stood across the table from her, not taking a seat. His eyes swept over the recorder and the blank agreement. You hired a lawyer. Alara didn't bother to answer. Sit, she said. Julian pulled out a chair. The moment his back touched the chair's unforgiving surface, his brow furrowed in a sharp spasm of pain. His breath hitched. But he quickly recovered, leaning forward to brace himself on the table's edge and sit upright. His gaze fell on Alara's face. Alara, about the compensation, I've thought. Look at this first. Alara pulled a single sheet of A4 paper from her folder and pushed it to the center of the table. It was the list she had handwritten. The script was neat, precise, with no corrections. Julian looked down at it. His fingers, resting on the tabletop, froze. The list read, 12% of personal shares in Hawthorne Global, market value approximately $3.4 billion, to be transferred to Alara Vance. One commercial property on Madison Avenue, Upper East Side, 4,500 SQFT, annual rental income, $6.8 million. One commercial property in Greenwich Village, 2,800 SQFT, including subterranean storage. Full ownership of the Carmine Street Wellness Clinic, including all medical equipment and operating licenses. Cash sum of $50 million USD to be transferred within 3 days. Julian finished reading and said nothing. The silence stretched. Beside them, Catherine Zane opened her notebook, her pen poised. Alara, Julian finally spoke, his voice painfully raw. This adds up to almost $4 billion. $3.97 billion, Miss Zane supplemented with clinical precision. By our estimates, that's approximately 1/3 of Mr. Hawthorne's current personal disposable assets. Julian's throat worked. He looked up at Alara, his gaze a mixture of shock, distress, and a complex, pained attempt to understand. Alara, do you know what this means? That 12% represents my core voting power in the company. If I transfer it, my influence on the board. I know, she cut him off with 2 words. He closed his mouth. What I'm trying to say is, he tried a different angle, his voice softening. Of course I will take care of you and Ren. I can set up a monthly payment, you name the amount. I don't want an allowance. Alara. Julian Hawthorne, she said his full name again, and his lips pressed into a thin line. Last night in the library, you said something. Alara's gaze was fixed on his face, her tone as calm as if discussing a matter that had nothing to do with her. You said, Ren will be removed from the trust. I will make other arrangements for her. Julian said nothing. A multi-billion-dollar trust, she paused. Ren is your only child. According to the Hawthorne family charter, she was meant to be the sole beneficiary. You struck her name off with a single stroke of a pen. His fingers on the table tightened, knuckles white. So let me ask you. Alara's voice was devoid of any inflection. When the sole heir to a multi-billion-dollar trust is disinherited, what do you think she is worth? Julian's breath caught. This isn't about money. Not for you, Alara interrupted. For Ren it is. Her right hand came up from under the table, her index finger tapping the list. The 12% stake is the compensation Ren deserves for being kicked out of the trust. The 3 properties are the payment I've earned for 3 years of managing this family's health and its medical foundation. And the $50 million in cash, she paused, is for the postpartum hemorrhage that nearly killed me on the operating table while I was giving birth to Ren. The color drained from Julian's face. Alara, the hemorrhage. I know. I waited outside the OR for 6 hours that day. You waited for 6 hours, Alara repeated, her tone holding no sarcasm, not even anger. She was simply stating a fact. And then it took you 30 days to decide to kick both of us out. Julian's body went rigid. He slumped back in his chair. The hard surface pressed against his injured back, causing beads of sweat to form on his forehead. But he didn't move. The silence was long. The Madison Avenue property and the village apothecary. Fine, he finally said, his voice dry, as if squeezed from the deepest part of his throat. The Carmine Street Clinic, too. I'll have the $50 million in your account within 3 days. And the shares? Miss Zane asked. Julian's fingers tapped unconsciously on the table. 12%, he swallowed. Alara, this isn't just about money. It's the voting power my father left me. If I transfer it. Your father also left you the family trust. Alara's voice was as smooth as glass. He gave you the trust, and you turned around and kicked your daughter out of it. You've already made a choice between your voting power and your daughter once. This is just me asking you to make it again. Julian's throat moved up and down 3 times. He lowered his head, both hands braced on the table. Miss Zane's pen glided across the paper, noting his every reaction. The red light of the recorder blinked, faithfully capturing every second of the conversation. Fine. A long time later, the word fell from Julian's lips, so quiet it was almost inaudible. 12%, he said. I'll have the legal department draw up the transfer agreement today. Alara nodded. She said no thank you, no unnecessary words at all. She simply reached out, took the list from the table, folded it, and placed it in her folder. Her movements were steady. Her hand was no longer shaking. Miss Zane, she turned to her lawyer, please follow up on the transfer process. This agreement only becomes official when all deeds, documents, and funds are in my possession, within 3 days. No problem, Miss Zane said, closing her notebook and standing up. Julian remained in his chair, unmoving. He watched Alara get up, gather her files, turn off the recorder, and hand it back to her lawyer. Every action was crisp, efficient, without a single wasted motion. Ilara. She paused, her back to him. Do you hate me? Her right hand was at her side, the folder tucked under her left arm. Hate you? She said, her voice as light as if she were remarking on the weather. What a waste of time. She walked out of the drawing room. That afternoon, the head of the Hawthorne Global Legal Department personally delivered the first batch of documents. The transfer agreements for the 3 properties were already stamped with Julian's personal seal. Miss Vance, the lawyer, a balding man in his 40s, said professionally as he laid out the papers. The titles for the Madison Avenue and Greenwich Village properties are here. The Carmine Street Clinic is more complex. It involves a change in the medical operating license, which will require you to go to the Department of Health in person. I know, Alara said, signing the last document. I'll handle the license change myself. The lawyer nodded, gathered the signed papers, and packed them away. As he was about to leave, he hesitated. Anything else? Mr. Hawthorne asked me to inquire. About the upstate vineyard. Would you like that as well? I don't want anything that isn't on the list. The lawyer blinked, clearly surprised she would refuse an extra asset. He nodded and left quickly. Alara sat at the table, looking at the deeds stamped in red. The properties were hers now. She stacked them neatly and placed them, one by one, into a metal lockbox. Her hands were steady. The second day, the $50 million arrived. Alara's phone buzzed with a notification from her bank. She glanced at it, then turned the screen off and placed it on her nightstand. Wren was waking in her crib. Alara picked her up and began to feed her. It was all mechanical. Her daughter's tiny hand gripped the fabric of her shirt, holding on tight. The money, the properties. Is it enough? No. Not until the last step. Nothing was settled until the share transfer was complete. Just one more day, she whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead. On the 3rd morning, Catherine Zane called. Miss Vance, the 12% equity transfer agreement is signed. The official change of ownership will be filed this afternoon. I can have a courier deliver all the documents, or you can pick them up. Courier them, Alara said. To the Greenwich Village apothecary address. Good. Also, Miss Zane paused. Julian Hawthorne's lawyer asked me a question on the phone. I felt I should tell you. What question? He asked if, after you receive everything, you will have any further contact with Mr. Hawthorne. Alara held the phone, silent for a second. How did you reply? I said that question falls outside the scope of my legal services and suggested he ask you directly. Good, Alara said. That was the right answer. She hung up. The phone screen reflected her face. She looked better than she had 3 days ago. She walked to the window. Outside, the Hawthorne gardens were bare. The December flowers were gone. 3 days, 3 properties, $50 million, a 12% core stake in a global company, all in her possession. Adding her own dowry, the properties from her father, and the fund from her colleagues. She and Wren were secure for life. Alara turned and began to pack. She had accumulated many things in 3 years. Most of the clothes, jewelry, and luxury goods were gifts from Julian. She looked them over, one by one, and in the end, only packed the few sets of simple clothes she'd brought from home, 2 boxes of medical texts and herbs, and Wren's essentials. The rest she left. Maria stood nearby, holding Wren. Ma'am, you're leaving? Yes. Alara zipped her suitcase. Just then, footsteps approached the door. Not a servant announcing a visitor, but someone simply pushing the door open. Julian stood in the doorway. He looked a little better than he had 3 days ago, wearing a dark gray cashmere coat. His back was probably still in pain, because he stood slightly hunched, not with his usual ramrod straight posture. He saw the packed suitcases and boxes, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Alara's face. You're leaving today? The agreement is executed, Alara said. There's nothing left for me here. Julian stood in the doorway, not entering. His hands were at his sides, his right hand clenching and unclenching. Where will you go? South. South where? Alara turned to face him fully. Julian Hawthorne, her voice was flat. Article 7 of the agreement. Following the dissolution of the marriage, both parties shall not interfere in the other's life. You signed it yourself. His lips moved as if to speak, but no words came out. He took a step back, clearing the doorway. Alara picked up her suitcase. As she reached the door, she paused. Not out of hesitation, but because Maria was still behind her, holding Ren. Maria, let's go. Yes, ma'am. Maria clutched Ren tightly and followed. As Alara passed Julian, less than 2 feet separated them. She could smell the faint scent of medicinal ointment on him, for the lash wounds on his back. She didn't look at him. She just walked past. Julian stood frozen, watching her drag the suitcase down the hall, Maria following with Ren in her arms. Ren's little head rested on Maria's shoulder, her wide, dark eyes happening to look right at him. His right hand clenched into a fist, knuckles white, but he didn't follow. The moment Alara stepped out of the main doors of the Hawthorne estate, the cold December wind hit her. Her pace was much faster than when she'd arrived. The wheels of her suitcase clattered on the stone pavers. She didn't stop until she reached the taxi waiting at the curb. The driver helped with her luggage. Maria got in the back with Ren. Alara was the last one in. She closed the door. In the rearview mirror, the iron gates of the Hawthorne estate grew smaller and smaller. She didn't look back. Her right hand, resting on her knee, was no longer shaking. From the moment she signed the agreement until now, 3 full days. A settlement worth $3.97 billion. A daughter with a new last name. A lockbox full of deeds. This was everything she had taken from Julian Hawthorne. It was also the absolute limit of what she could take. In Maria's arms, Ren stirred, her small hand reaching out and grasping at the air. Alara offered her finger, and her daughter immediately latched on. The grip was not strong, but it was tight. Grand Central Station, she told the driver. The car moved forward. The night before leaving the Hawthorne estate, Alara was in her room changing Ren's last diaper. The suitcases were packed and stacked by the door. The metal lockbox, holding all the deeds and bank cards, sat on top of them. Maria was in the next room, cleaning Ren's bottles. Ren had just finished feeding and was half asleep in her crib. The courtyard gate was pushed open, not knocked on, pushed open. Cassandra Lowe stood in the doorway. She wasn't wearing her signature, plain white patient's dress. She had on a pale yellow cashmere cardigan, her hair pinned up with a white jade hairpin. Alara recognized the pin, Mrs. Hawthorne had wanted to give it to her on her birthday last year. Alara had declined, saying it was too valuable. Now, it was in Cassandra's hair. Alara, Cassandra said, her tone more confident than when they had last met in the hallway, though her voice remained soft, laced with a practiced apology. I heard you were leaving tomorrow. I came to see you off. Alara was tucking in Ren's blanket. Her hands didn't stop. And to see little Ren on Julian's behalf, Cassandra added, taking a step into the courtyard. Her eyes scanned toward the crib. After all, she's his flesh and blood. He may not say it, but I know he worries. Miss Lowe, Alara interrupted, her voice low. Ren has been removed from the trust and her name has been changed to Vance. She has nothing to do with the Hawthorne family. You needn't worry on his behalf. Cassandra's smile faltered for a second, then returned, a mask of fragile beauty. She sighed, looking down. Alara, you say that because you hate me. But it's not Julian's fault. I'm the one who came back and disturbed your lives. If I hadn't been kidnapped all those years ago. Miss Lowe, Alara cut her off a second time. She looked up, her gaze so calm and empty that Cassandra's words died in her throat. I'm leaving at 6 a.m. I still have things to pack. If there's nothing else, please leave. Cassandra stood frozen, wringing the sleeves of her cardigan. Her eyes darted toward the crib again. I just wanted to see Ren. No. The word landed with finality. The atmosphere in the courtyard changed. The mask of gentle sweetness on Cassandra's face cracked. Something flashed in her eyes, not hurt, but the sharp anger of someone who had been publicly rebuffed. But she quickly smiled again. All right. If it's not convenient, I won't impose. She turned and walked away. As she reached the gate, a soft whimper came from the room. Ren had stirred in her sleep. Cassandra's footsteps paused for a fraction of a second, and then she was gone. 15 minutes later, Alara had soothed Ren and was about to continue packing when she heard hurried footsteps and a hushed argument from the courtyard. You can't go in! Ma'am said no visitors. Get out of my way. I have something to clear up with her. It was Cassandra's voice, but no longer the soft, delicate whisper. This voice was shrill, filled with a barely contained fury. Before Alara could react, the door to her rooms was slammed open. Cassandra burst in, followed by Maria, who was still holding a baby bottle, clearly having been pushed aside. Cassandra's face was flushed, her hand clutching a handkerchief so tightly her knuckles were white. Alara Vance, she had even dropped the pretense of a polite address. You think you can act high and mighty just because you took his money? You're just the woman he divorced. Julian doesn't owe you anything. Alara stood by the doorway, unmoving. So just take your brat and get out of New York. And don't ever let me see you again. Enough. A man's voice came from the courtyard. Julian appeared in the doorway. His face was dark. He strode in and grabbed Cassandra's arm. Cassie, what are you doing? Julian. The moment Cassandra saw him, her eyes welled up with tears, her voice instantly switching back to its fragile frequency. I just wanted to see Ren. She wouldn't let me. She was so cold to me. I was not, Alara said simply. Julian looked at her, then back at Cassandra. Cassie, go back first, he said in a placating tone. Alara is leaving tomorrow. Don't. No! Cassandra shook his hand off, her voice growing shrill and agitated. Why is she stopping me? I just want to see the baby. Julian, you know I can never have children of my own. With that, she ignored Alara and strode quickly toward the inner room where the crib was. Cassandra, stop! Alara moved, planting herself firmly in front of her at the bedroom's entrance. This is my child's room. You are not going in. Get out of the way! Cassandra tried to push past her, and the two women began struggling at the doorway. Julian lunged forward, his face panicked. Both of you stop! Cassie, calm down. He got between them, but his main goal was to placate Cassandra. He grabbed Alara's arm to pull her away. Alara, just back off. She's not stable. It was in that chaotic moment, as Julian was trying to pull Alara back while shielding Cassandra, that he lost his footing. He stumbled forward, and his own hip slammed hard into the crib. The crib wobbled violently and then tipped. Ren, who had been sleeping, slid to one side and began to fall out, her head aimed directly at the sharp wooden corner of a nearby side table. The table was solid wood, its corners sharp and unforgiving. In that moment, the world went silent for Alara. Her vision blurred. Her mind was empty. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She didn't know how she lunged forward. She only knew that a searing pain exploded from her knees as they hit the floor. Her hand shot out, her fingers just brushing the edge of Ren's swaddling blanket. She caught her. She snatched her daughter from the air. Ren's head was less than an inch from the corner of the table. An inch. Alara knelt on the floor, clutching her daughter to her chest. Her hands were shaking, her entire arm trembling uncontrollably. Her lips were white, her jaw clenched so tight the veins in her temples throbbed. Ren, terrified, burst into shrieks, sharp, piercing, soul-shattering cries that filled the room. Alara knelt there, motionless. She couldn't make a sound. Alara. Julian stood in the doorway, his face sheet white. He saw the overturned crib, the sharp wooden corner of the table, Alara trembling on the floor, and in her arms, their daughter, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Alara, are you all right? He started to move forward. Don't come near me. Alara's voice was squeezed from between her teeth, low and raw. Don't you dare come near me. Julian froze. Cassandra, on the other side of the room, was pale as well. She backed away until she hit the wall, her fingers twisting the fabric of her dress. I didn't mean to, she stammered. I just wanted to see the baby. I didn't think the crib would fall. Alara didn't look at her. Her head was bowed, her forehead nearly touching Ren's face. Her daughter's cries slowly subsided into broken sobs. A tiny hand gripped her blouse, the fingernails almost invisible, but holding on with all the strength a newborn could muster. Alara closed her eyes. The pain in her knees was a dull, throbbing ache. The scratch on the back of her hand stung, but none of it mattered. What mattered was that inch. 1 inch, and Ren's head would have hit the table. An infant not yet 2 months old, her skull not yet hardened. 1 inch. Julian, Cassandra's voice was tearful. I really didn't mean it. You have to believe me. I wanted to see a child so badly. I can never have one of my own. Cassie, Julian turned to her, his voice low and quick. You need to go back first. I'll handle this. But, go back, his tone grew sharper. But his hand reached out and took her by the shoulder, gently guiding her toward the door. He was sending her away. Alara opened her eyes. She watched Julian escorting Cassandra to the door, heard the anxious, comforting, almost pitying tone in his voice as he spoke to the woman who had nearly killed his daughter. It was the same tone he had used just moments ago when he asked her, "Are you all right?" No, it was more tender. At the door, Cassandra glanced back at Alara. In her tear-filled eyes, something flashed. Alara saw it. It wasn't guilt. It was triumph. Julian handed Cassandra over to her caregiver, murmuring a few instructions. Then he turned and walked back, his steps quick, as if eager to return and comfort Alara. Alara, his steps faltered. Alara had gotten to her feet. She didn't know how her legs were supporting her. Her knees were shaking, but she was standing. Ren was now cradled in her left arm, her right hand hanging at her side. "Alara, she really didn't mean it," Julian said, taking a step closer, his voice full of exhaustion and distress. "The things she's been through. She's not mentally stable. She can't be around children. I know." Julian's words were cut off. "You said the same thing last time." Alara looked at him. "The day you came to me to ask for a divorce. The same words. She can't bear the thought of me having a child." Julian's throat worked. "You say she's unstable." Alara's voice was very quiet, as if stating a fact about a stranger. "But what I just saw was not an unstable person. I saw someone who deliberately forced her way in, deliberately knocked over a crib, and deliberately tried to kill my daughter." "Alara, be calm." "I am calm." And she was. Terrifyingly calm for a mother whose daughter had just escaped death. But Julian couldn't see her right hand, hidden by her sleeve, trembling violently. "Julian Hawthorne." She said his name one last time. "You pushed me." The color drained from Julian's face. I didn't mean to push you," he stammered, his voice urgent. "You two were struggling. I was trying to pull you apart, to stop it from escalating." And what was the result? One question, and it killed all his explanations. Julian opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Alara looked at him. 3 years. They had been married for 3 years. She had brewed his teas, nursed him through fevers. When she had suffered from morning sickness, he had personally made her dumplings. Those days were not fake. But the man standing before her now had just physically pushed her aside, allowing another woman to harm their child. It wasn't even intentional. It was instinctive. He had instinctively chosen to protect Cassandra, and that was more devastating than any deliberate act. Alara handed Ren to Maria, who had rushed over. The nanny took the baby, her face a mask of horror, her lips trembling as if to speak, but a single look from Alara silenced her. Alara turned to face Julian. He stood there, his face ashen. The 50 lash wounds on his back still forced him into a stiff posture. Now he was slightly bent, as if wanting to say something, or perhaps reach for her. Alara raised her right hand. Slap. The sound of the slap echoed through the room. Julian's head snapped to the side. The force of the blow jarred his entire body, aggravating his injuries. A trickle of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. He hadn't dodged it. That, Alara's voice was low and steady, without a tremor, was for the last 3 years. Then she raised her hand again. The second slap landed on his other cheek, harder than the first. Julian staggered, and half his face began to swell immediately. And that was for Ren. The room was dead silent. Maria stood in the corner, clutching Ren, not daring to breathe. Julian stood where he was. He didn't dodge, didn't block, didn't even look up at her. His shoulders were trembling slightly, not from the pain, but because he had no idea how to face this moment. Alara lowered her hand. Her palm stung, a fiery ache. Her fingers curled into a fist inside her sleeve, but she let no one see. From this day forward, her voice carried clearly through every corner of the room. I, Alara Vance, and you, Julian Hawthorne, are finished. All debts are settled. She turned to Maria. Let's go. Just one word. Maria clutched Ren and hurried to follow. Alara walked to the door, picked up her suitcase. The metal lockbox was on top. She lifted it all. The body of a woman not 2 months postpartum, carrying dozens of pounds. Her arm muscles trembled, but she didn't stop. She walked past Julian without a glance. She walked through the courtyard gate without looking back. As she passed through the moon gate of the west wing, the night wind rushed in, so cold it hurt her bones. Her steps were slow. Her knees, from where she had knelt so hard, ached with every move. But she didn't stop once. No one followed her out. Outside the side gate of the Hawthorne estate, the taxi she had ordered yesterday was waiting. The driver helped with the luggage. Maria got in the back with Ren. Alara was the last to get in. The moment she closed the door, her right hand finally gave an uncontrollable tremor. She had used too much force in those 2 slaps. The old injury in the web of her thumb throbbed, and the whole hand was shaking. She pressed it down with her left hand, hiding it on her lap. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Grand Central Station." The car started. Through the window, the lights of the Hawthorne estate grew smaller in the rearview mirror, then disappeared into the night. In Maria's arms, Wren had stopped crying. She was quietly sucking on her fist, her bright, dark eyes blinking in the dim light of the car. Alara reached out and offered her index finger to her daughter. Wren immediately grasped it. The grip wasn't strong, but it was tight. Alara lowered her head, pressing her lips to the back of her daughter's hand. She said nothing. The streetlights passed by the window, one by one, casting fleeting patterns of light and shadow across her face. She closed her eyes, her breathing shallow. Her right hand was still shaking. But it didn't matter anymore. They were gone. 3 months later. Port Blossom, Oregon. Alara knelt in front of an apothecary cabinet, inspecting the last shipment of fritillary bulbs. She picked one up, held it under her nose to check the scent, and made a check mark on the invoice. Wren, now 4 months old, sat in a bamboo playpen behind the counter. She could push herself up on her arms for a few seconds at a time. A string of drool ran down her chin as she stared, mesmerized, at a bundle of dried mugwort hanging from the ceiling. The shop was small. The front was a consultation room and pharmacy, one wall lined with dark wood medicine drawers. The back was where she and Wren lived. Her grandmother lived in the next alley over, a 3-minute walk away. Life was slow. So slow that sometimes she forgot that just 3 months ago, she was the young mistress of the Hawthorne dynasty in New York. Her hand no longer shook. The tremors had stopped in the second week after she left. The man appeared in the final week of the 3rd month. It was 3 p.m., and the shop was quiet. Alara was in the back changing Wren's diaper when the wind chime on the front door tinkled. She walked to the front, holding Wren. A middle-aged man stood at the counter. He was in his early 50s, tall but noticeably thin, with a sallow complexion and an unnatural flush high on his cheekbones. He wore a dark gray linen shirt, the cuffs rolled up to reveal a vintage Patek Philippe, not a local, and not an ordinary man. "A cough," the man began, his voice low and raspy, thick with phlegm. 3 months. Local doctors said chronic bronchitis. 2 rounds of antibiotics did nothing. "Sit." Alara gestured to the consultation stool. She placed Wren back in her playpen, washed her hands, and sat down. "Your wrist." The man placed his left wrist on the pulse pillow. The moment her 3 fingers touched his skin, her brow furrowed. It wasn't a 3-month illness. This was the result of years of overwork. "How long have you really been coughing?" she asked, not looking up. The man's eyes shifted slightly. "About a year and a half." "A year and a half," Alara repeated. She stood and went to the medicine cabinet. "Your constitution is depleted. The Western medicine you took only suppressed the symptoms, not the root cause." She began weighing herbs. "You're not from around here. You've traveled a long way." The man didn't speak. "The wear on your shoes is uneven, heavier on the left. There's dust under your nails, but your hands are not calloused, not a manual laborer. Based on your pulse, this condition should have flared up at least 3 days ago. You pushed through it to get here." She didn't turn around. After a few seconds of silence, the man let out a low chuckle. Sharp eyes. Alara's hand paused. The sign on her shop simply read Vance Apothecary. She turned her head. The man was still seated, but his posture had changed. His back was straight, his hands resting on his knees. "You know who I am," he stated. "Port Blossom, Vance Apothecary." The man's tone was calm. "Daughter of the renowned herbalist, Dr. Alistair Vance. Returned from New York 3 months ago after a divorce from the Hawthorne family, with an infant daughter." Alara's fingers rested on the scale, unmoving. "You've been investigating me." "Not investigating," the man said, placing a black business card with simple gold lettering on the counter. It had only 2 words and a phone number. "Marcus Thorne, Chief of Staff for Mr. Silas Thorne, Thorne Consolidated, Asia Pacific," the man said. "Mr. Thorne is passing through Oregon. His chronic condition flared up, and his personal physician is also unwell. We heard of a doctor, Vance in Port Blossom, with exceptional skill and came to seek treatment. Silas Thorne. Thorne Consolidated. The multinational conglomerate with headquarters in Singapore, its empire spanning finance, energy, and defense, a league far above the Hawthorns. Is it just for a consultation? Alara asked. Marcus Thorne looked at her, his gaze direct. Just a consultation. The next morning, an unremarkable black van parked behind the apothecary. Marcus helped another man inside, Silas Thorne. early 60s, slender, with a gaunt but refined face. He walked with a slight, intermittent pause, suppressing a cough. He wore a simple navy jacket, his graying hair neatly combed. He looked less like a patient and more like a retired professor on vacation. "Dr. Vance," he said, his voice gentle. He sat and placed his wrist on the pillow. Alara took his pulse. It was far worse than Marcus's. "How long has it been since you had a proper night's sleep?" Silas Thorne was taken aback. "Business is demanding." I asked how long. After a 2-second silence. 3 years. Alara withdrew her hand. "The prescriptions you've been taking are wrong. Your body is like a pot that's been boiled dry, and you keep pouring cold water into it. Sooner or later, it will crack." Her tone was as flat as a weather report. The man behind her was silent for a moment, then let out a soft laugh. "That's the first time anyone has spoken to me with such little courtesy." Alara didn't turn around. "I'm a doctor, not a courtier. If you want courtesy, talk to Marcus." Another low laugh. "All right. Then, Dr. Vance, what is the treatment?" 3 months. Come once every 7 days. I will adjust the formula based on your pulse. No alcohol, no spicy food, no late nights. If you can't do that, I can," he answered quickly. Alara turned and looked at him. The man's face was still sallow, but his eyes were bright, a faint smile on his lips. "Good." She handed him the first packet of herbs. "Go back and brew this. If you feel any discomfort tomorrow, have Marcus come find me." As Silas Thorne reached the door, he paused. "Dr. Vance," he said, turning his head, his gaze landing on her face. "You mentioned 3 years of no sleep. What about you?" Alara's movement stopped for a fraction of a second. "My affairs are no concern of yours, Mr. Thorne." He didn't press, simply nodded, and left. 7 days later, Silas Thorne returned. He looked better. A month later, at his 5th visit, his complexion had improved significantly. "You're recovering well," Alara said after taking his pulse. "Another 2 months, and we can stop the active treatment." Thorne took the new prescription but didn't hand it to Marcus. Instead, he placed it on his knee. "Dr. Vance," he said. "I'd like to show you something." He took a craft paper envelope from his jacket and placed it on the consultation desk. It was sealed with a red wax stamp. Alara looked at it but didn't reach for it. "Last month, Thorne's voice was flat. My intelligence division was conducting routine due diligence and found some anomalous capital flows related to Hawthorne Global. We followed the trail, and it led us to a person." He paused. "Cassandra Lowe." Alara's fingers tightened for a second, then relaxed. "That has nothing to do with me. And what if I told you," Thorne's gaze was fixed on her, "that her kidnapping 3 years ago was a fabrication?" Alara said nothing. "What if I told you she was never infertile?" The room was quiet. Wren babbled in her playpen. Alara looked at her daughter, who was happily chewing on her own toes, then turned back. "Open it," she said. Thorne pushed the envelope toward her. Alara broke the seal and pulled out 2 sheets of paper. The first was a summary of an intelligence report. It detailed Cassandra Lowe's real activities over the past 3 years. Not kidnapped, but enrolled in a 1.5-year-long corporate intelligence training program at a facility owned by a rival corporation. At the bottom of the report was a line, "Cassandra Lowe, real name Cassidy Lynch. Her brother, Donovan Lynch, is the executive VP for Apex Global, a direct competitor to Hawthorne Global in the defense sector." The second sheet was a pharmacy record. The member profile listed Cassidy Lynch. The purchased item, Yasmin, a short-term birth control pill, 1 pack per month. The purchase history started 18 months ago and was uninterrupted. The last purchase date was the previous Wednesday. Alara read both pages and placed them back in the envelope. Her hand did not shake. Her voice was flat. "So the kidnapping was arranged by Apex Global. She was never abducted. She came back claiming she was infertile, but she's been on birth control this whole time." "Correct," Thorne said. "Hawthorne Global holds exclusive contracts for 3 core military supply chains. Apex has been coveting them for years. Cassidy Lynch's mission was to acquire trade secrets as Julian Hawthorne's partner, while emotionally manipulating him to steer Hawthorne's core assets toward Apex." Alara placed the envelope back on the desk. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you saved my life," Thorne said, his tone still even, but carrying weight. "And the things you lost, you shouldn't have lost them this way." Alara was silent for a long time. Wren called out from the back, probably wanting to be fed. "Mr. Thorne," she stood up. "What do you plan to do about this?" Thorne also stood. "Julian Hawthorne is marrying Cassidy Lynch next month. I hear the invitations have already been sent. He paused at the door, turning back to look at her. He also sent my corporation a business proposal, with a wedding invitation attached. Will you go? A corner of Thorne's mouth twitched. Dr. Vance, do you think I should? Alara walked to the playpen and bent down to pick up Wren. Her daughter's little hand immediately gripped her shirt. Mr. Thorne can go if he wishes, she said. It has nothing to do with me. Thorne looked at her for a moment, then nodded. I'll take the medicine as prescribed. See you next week. He left. Alara stood by the medicine cabinet, holding Wren. She looked down at her daughter's face. Wren was 5 months old now, her face rounder, her complexion rosy. Her features were starting to look more like her mother's. The craft envelope lay on the desk. She didn't look at it again. 1 week later, Julian Hawthorne called Silas Thorne's private number. The phone rang for a long time. Mr. Thorne, Julian's voice was respectfully subdued. This is Julian Hawthorne from Hawthorne Global. I know who you are. The voice on the other end was deep and steady. Mr. Thorne, I sent over a partnership proposal. I was wondering if you'd had a chance to look at it. I have. The line went silent. Julian pressed on. Also, my wedding is on the 18th of next month. The invitation was sent to your Singapore office. If you're available, I would be honored by your presence. Mr. Hawthorne, Thorne interrupted him. The woman you're marrying is Cassidy Lynch. Julian froze. He hadn't expected Thorne to know the bride's name. Yes. Mr. Thorne, do you know Cassie? The line was quiet for a beat. Then came a very faint, almost imperceptible chuckle. No, I've just heard things. Thorne's tone was casual. I heard she went missing 3 years ago. Suffered a great deal. I heard you took 50 lashes of family discipline for her. Even divorced your ex-wife. Julian's throat worked. These were not secrets in their circle. Yes, his voice lowered. Cassie sacrificed too much for me. She can never have children. I owe her. I can only spend the rest of my life making it up to her. The line was silent for so long, Julian thought the call had dropped. Mr. Thorne? I'm here. Thorne's voice came back, unhurried. Mr. Hawthorne, you will soon find out exactly what it is you've thrown away. Julian's fingers stopped tapping. Mr. Thorne, what do you mean by that? Nothing. Thorne's tone became casual again. I received the invitation. On the 18th, I'll send someone. The call ended. Julian sat in his study, staring at the phone. Thorne's last words echoed in his mind. What it is you've thrown away. He frowned, then shook his head. A man like Thorne always spoke in riddles. It was probably a hint about the terms of the partnership. He put the phone down and picked up the wedding schedule. The 18th of the month. The side hall of the Hawthorne estate was draped in red silk. Guests were few. Old Mr. Hawthorne and his wife were not present. The doors to their wing of the estate were locked. Julian stood at the end of the red carpet in a custom dark gray suit. He was thinner, his face more angular. The past few months of liquidating his own assets to fund the wedding had taken their toll. Cassidy emerged from a side door in her white gown. Her face was hidden behind a pearl-studded veil. Julian, she whispered, her voice trembling. He walked to her and straightened a stray lock of hair. Let's go, he said gently. The officiant began. First, a bow to honor the family. Julian turned and bowed. Cassidy followed. At that exact moment, the main doors of the hall were thrown open. Silas Thorne stood in the doorway. He was not wearing the understated clothes from his visits to Oregon. He wore a black cashmere overcoat over a dark suit, his tie loose. Behind him stood Marcus and 4 security guards in black uniforms. His health was restored. He radiated the power of a man who commanded a global empire. The room fell silent. Am I late? Thorne's voice was not loud, but it carried through the hall. I hope I haven't missed the main event. Julian straightened up, his face a mask of surprise. He hadn't expected Thorne to come in person. Mr. Thorne. He hurried over, a look of respectful delight on his face. You came yourself. I was passing through, Thorne said, casually taking a seat. His eyes moved from Julian to Cassidy, who stood frozen on the red carpet, her hands clenched so tight her knuckles were white under her gloves. A beautiful bride, Thorne remarked. He stood up and walked to the edge of the carpet. Since I'm here, I should present a gift. He glanced at Marcus, who produced a folder. Thorne took it, but before that, his voice dropped, his smile never leaving his lips, but his eyes turning cold. I have a question for the bride. Julian's brow furrowed. Mr. Thorne. Mr. Hawthorne. Thorne looked at him. I'm speaking to the bride. You will listen. Julian's lips pressed into a thin line. Thorne turned back to Cassidy. Miss Lynch, he began. Or should I call you Donovan Lynch's sister? Or perhaps a long-term trainee of Apex Global? The air was sucked out of the room. Julian swayed. Mr. Thorne, his voice was raw. What is the meaning of this? Thorne ignored him. He opened the folder. Inside were 2 documents. He held up the first one. This dossier, his voice was calm, was obtained by my intelligence division 3 months ago and has since been authenticated by the FBI's corporate espionage unit. He read from it. Subject: Cassidy Lynch. Sibling: Donovan Lynch, Executive VP, Apex Global. 3 years ago, under the guise of a kidnapping, subject attended a 1.5-year corporate intelligence training program. Her mission: to acquire core secrets related to Hawthorne Global's military supply chain contracts. He stopped and looked at Julian. Julian's face was no longer pale. It was a dead, ashen gray. His hands were clenched into fists. That's impossible, he choked out. Cassie. She was kidnapped. She suffered. Thorne dropped the first document and held up the second. It was a handwritten prescription. This is from the private pharmacy Miss Lynch frequents. Monthly purchases, uninterrupted for the last 18 months. He held it out to Julian. Julian's hand trembled as he took it. Mr. Hawthorne, Thorne's voice softened slightly. You may not understand pharmacology, but your ex-wife, Alara Vance, a descendant of a famous line of herbalists. She would recognize this at a glance. He paused. This is not a prescription for infertility. It is a birth control prescription, disguised to regulate a menstrual cycle. It ensures, with absolute certainty, that pregnancy is impossible. No one in the hall spoke. Julian looked up, his eyes shot with blood. He turned to Cassidy. Cassie, he rasped. Tell me it's not true. Cassidy stood motionless, her hands trembling violently. Cassie! Julian lunged forward to rip off her veil. Marcus stepped between them. Mr. Hawthorne, Marcus said calmly, the FBI has issued a warrant. Miss Lynch is under arrest for corporate espionage. If you have objections, he paused, you can come with us. Julian stood frozen, his entire body shaking uncontrollably. Fake, he murmured. It was all fake. His voice broke. The kidnapping was fake. The torture was fake. The infertility. He looked down at the prescription in his hand. It was all fake. His knees buckled. He didn't kneel. He collapsed onto the red carpet. He began to laugh, a soft, broken sound. As he laughed, something slid down his cheek. It wasn't a tear. It was blood. A vessel in his temple had burst. A gout of blood erupted from his mouth, spraying onto his white shirt and the red carpet. The hall erupted in chaos. Cassidy ripped off her own veil and tried to run, but 2 security guards seized her. Let me go, she screamed. Julian, help me. Julian knelt on the floor, unmoving. Blood dripped from his mouth. He heard her screams, but he didn't even look up. Thorne watched him for a moment, his face impassive. He turned to leave, then paused, and said something to Marcus. Marcus walked back and placed another envelope on the floor beside Julian. It was an official notice. Due to an internal investigation involving corporate espionage and the leak of classified defense information, all military-related assets of Hawthorne Global are hereby frozen. Marcus turned and followed Thorne out. The guests fled. Cassidy's screams faded as she was dragged away. The hall was empty, save for Julian. He knelt on the ruined carpet, the celebratory red silks mocking him. His lips were still moving. 50 lashes. I took 50 lashes. Ren. I disinherited Ren. Alara. His body slumped forward until his forehead touched the floor. His shoulders shook in violent, silent spasms. 6 months later, a taxi pulled up to the Hawthorne estate. The main gate's brass plaque, bearing the family name, was gone. A moving truck was parked out front. Julian Hawthorne walked out of the side courtyard where he'd been locked away for months. He wore the same dark suit from the wedding, now stained and rumpled. In his hand, he clutched a rolled-up painting, a portrait of Alara he had commissioned years ago, now creased and worn. He stood and watched the movers for a moment, then turned and walked down the street. No one stopped him. 1 year later, Port Blossom, Oregon. The first winter rain fell. In the back of her apothecary, Alara was feeding Ren, who was almost a year old. The shop was closed for the day. Maria came in from the back. "Ma'am," she said, her expression worried. There's a car across the street. It's been parked there since last night." Alara didn't stop feeding Ren. "Whose car?" "I don't know, but the man inside hasn't left at all. I think—" "Ma'am, it looks a lot like Mr. Hawthorne." The spoon clinked against the bowl. Alara set it down. Ren, unhappy, reached for it. "Ma'am, should I?" "No," Alara said. "It's fine. Let him stay there." The next morning, the rain had stopped. Alara opened her shop at her usual time. The car door across the street creaked open. Julian got out. He had been in there all night. His expensive suit was crumpled, his face unshaven. He looked gaunt and exhausted, his eyes sunken. In his hand, he clutched a painting, now creased and damp. He staggered across the street and stopped in front of the shop. When he saw Alara, he froze. He looked up. His eyes were clear. "Alara," he rasped, his voice like sand on stone. I know everything." Alara stood in the doorway, wearing a simple cotton jacket, her hands still damp from preparing Ren's breakfast. She just looked at him. It was all fake. His lips trembled. The kidnapping, the infertility, it was all a lie. "I signed Ren out of the trust. I took 50 lashes. I thought I was atoning." He gave a laugh that was more horrifying than a sob. "And the sin I was atoning for never even existed." "Alara," he begged, his voice lower still, "let me see her. Just one look. I won't touch her. I'll leave right after." Alara looked at the man kneeling in the muddy rainwater. Half a year ago, in the library, watching him take those lashes, she had felt pain. Half a year ago, watching him instinctively push her aside, she had felt hate. Now, looking at this broken man, she felt nothing. It was like looking at a stranger. "Julian Hawthorne," she said, her voice holding no anger, no scorn, no pity. He looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Ren's last name is Vance," she said, her tone as clinical as if she were speaking to a patient. "The legal change was finalized 3 months ago. She has nothing to do with you." She tossed an envelope out the door. It landed in the puddle in front of him. It contained the official documents Silas Thorne had sent her months ago, the updated family records, the legal name change. He fumbled with it, his wet fingers unable to get a grip. He tore it open with his teeth. He read the documents. He saw the name Ren Vance, guardian. Alara Vance. The paper shook in his hands. His shoulders slumped, like a dry branch that had finally snapped. His forehead fell to the cold, wet stone. He made no sound, but his whole body, curled up in front of her shop, trembled in violent, silent convulsions. Alara watched him for 3 seconds. Then she stepped back and closed the door. The bolt slid home with a soft click. Inside, the scent of herbs filled the air. From the back room, she could hear Ren waking up, not crying, but babbling happily. She was probably calling for her. Alara turned and walked toward the sound, her steps even and unhurried. As she passed the counter, she scooped up some herbs she had left to dry. "Coming," she called out, pushing open the door to the back room. Ren was sitting up in bed, a teething toy in her hand. When she saw her mother, she broke into a wide, gummy smile. "Mama." The word was mumbled, not quite clear, but it was there. Alara went to her and lifted her into her arms. Ren's small hands immediately gripped her collar, warm and strong. "Hungry?" Ren patted her shoulder, babbling. Alara carried her to the kitchen and served the warm porridge. She sat her daughter in her high chair, tied on a bib, and brought a spoonful to her lips. Ren ate, a smear of porridge on her cheek, and grinned. Outside, there was no sound. She didn't know if the man was still there. She didn't look back. She sat in front of her daughter, feeding her, spoonful by spoonful. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, landing on her hands, on Ren's face, on the steaming bowl of porridge. Ren's hair had grown in, soft and dark, tied in a tiny tuft on top of her head. Her face was round and rosy. Her eyes, dark and bright, were just like her mother's. When she smiled, they curved into crescents. "Slow down," Alara said, gently wiping her daughter's mouth. Ren looked up at her and, with perfect clarity this time, said again, "Mama." "Yes." Alara's hand paused. She leaned down and pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead. "I'm here."